Hi, muting on electric guitar. So both hands are involved in muting, and your picking hand is going to be muting the bass strings, the thicker strings. And so as I'm playing, for instance, if I'm just playing minor pentatonic, A minor pentatonic or blues. So as not to get any extraneous string noise, any strings ringing out that you don't want ringing out, any noise happening that you don't actually want going on, the side of the palm is muting the bass strings. So as I move down the strings, physically down the strings, but up the scale, this palm is moving like this, it's moving down, so that first of all it's not muting any strings because I want to hear that E string. Then pretty much as soon as I get to the A string, the side knife edge part of my palm is touching the E string, so that's muted. And then as I carry on to the D string, my palm is now touching the E and the A string, and as I carry on to the G string, it's now touching the E, A and D string, etc. until I get to the top E string, and it's pretty much touching all the other strings. Actually, let me just amend that. It's pretty much touching all the other strings usually except the string next to the one you're playing, because the string that you're actually playing, if I'm playing the top E string, the B string, the one next to it, is getting muted by the finger that is actually playing the E string, Certainly, at least with the first finger, so with the first finger, I'm fretting the top E string, but part of this finger is touching the B string, so that it's not ringing out. And when I went to this, using my little finger to do a bend here, you can see the shape of my fingers. I'm using fingers 2 and 3 to help the little finger bend, and my first finger is actually, I can either have it resting on the E string or in between the E and the B string, and what it's doing is muting that B string, So whenever you're on electric guitar, and I'm saying electric guitar rather than acoustic, but it applies to acoustic as well if you're doing this sort of single note playing, but it applies especially to electric because electric is amplified, and as soon as as soon as you're quite loud, you're going to hear all this stuff. Like if you don't mute the strings, you'll hear other strings ring out in sympathetic resonance. And of course, if you knock them, you'll definitely hear them ring out. And then there's another factor of when you... I'm not very loudly amplified, so you won't hear it much, but the other factor is when you come off a string, when you're done with it, say if I'm playing 5, 8, 5 on the E string, and then I want to go down to 8 or 5 on the B string. When I come off that E string, I don't just lift my finger off, because there's the note I want, and lifting my finger off, don't know if you can hear that. You can probably just hear a little bit that there's the noise of the open string as I take my finger off that E string. So what you want to do, because you don't want that extra noise, unless you actually want that sound, unless you want those two notes, in which case you'd do a pull off, but if you didn't, and you just wanted to go from that note to that note, or that note, whatever, what you do is you fret the note and play it as usual, and then when you want to move on to the next note, so I'm doing it legato, that is the notes are sustained and they're running into each other, not over each other, not like this, not at the same time, but just not a gap, not staccato like this, not that, but but even though it's legato, what I'm going to do is, you'll get to be able to do it at the same time. As I put this finger down, the little finger down for the second note, raising the first finger off the E, well, I'm raising the first finger from putting pressure on the E string. It's still touching the E string, yeah, to mute it. And I want to mute it so that I don't get that extra little sound. I'll make it a bit louder. That sort of sound, yeah, of taking the finger off a string. You will get that sound if you don't attend to it some way, mute it some way. And a very typical thing is pressing down to get the note, then you release the pressure, but the finger still touches the string so that the string is muted. And that becomes part of your playing. Also, another thing you can do is use the underside of the new finger to mute the string that you've just been on, assuming it's a string physically below. So if I'm on that top E string, and then I go to the B string, I kind of do belt and braces, I'm going to do both. But the position of my hand is such that the finger is not like this, it's not classical technique, it's like this, yeah? And that means the underside of my little finger is not only fretting the B string, but it's muting that top E string. Okay, so so what did I go through? Yeah, so muting with this hand, yeah, knife edge part of the hand is muting the bass strings as I move up. Muting with this hand, as you're, yeah, I didn't say this bit, as you're, say, like descending the scale, but moving physically up. As I move physically up, then all the strings below the fingers are going to be muted by the underside of these fingers. Mainly the fingers that you're using, well, in fact only the fingers that you're using to actually fret the strings. So mainly the first finger. So in that, my first finger, no, that wasn't good. There, that's better. My first finger was muting. Yeah, it's in this sort of hand position. It's not classical, because then none of these strings underneath this finger would be muted. You want this sort of position so that the first finger not only frets those notes, but whatever string it's on, if there's any strings underneath it, they're going to be muted by the underside of that finger. And then if you go to use the third or fourth finger, for example, very typically the like I just said before, the underside of this finger, or yeah, the underside or the little finger, whichever finger you're using, will at least mute the string directly beneath it. And if it's not muting that top E string, the first finger will be doing that. Yeah? Okay, so that's covered muting with your picking hand and your fretting hand. And muting when you're moving from note to note, yeah? So remember fret the note and then release the pressure, but keep the finger on the actual string. Okay, hope that helps.